Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the UMA Alumni Association's June webinar, Understanding Emotional Intelligence. I'm Caitlin. I'm the social media specialist here at UMA. Katrina Parker-Evelyn will be your speaker during today's webinar. Katrina is the talent manager at Ultimate Medical Academy and has been with the company since 2016. She's passionate about helping others realize and achieve their fullest potential. Katrina has a background in human resources and support center operations with a specialty in training, employee support, and leadership development. She received her bachelor's in psychology from the University of South Florida and her master's in industrial organization psychology from Argosy University. Before we begin, let's go over a quick breakdown of the webinar. Katrina will speak for roughly 45 minutes and leave an additional 15 minutes for the question and answer sessions. You can send your questions in at any time in the questions box, and we will collect them and address as many as possible at the end. If you experience any audio issues during the webinar, try exiting out of your current browser and opening up the webinar in a different browser. We recommend closing out of other pages and applications to help the platform run as smooth as possible. We also wanted to let you know that you're muted to prevent noise interference during the webinar. So if you have a question, be sure to send it in the questions box since we can't hear you. Last but not least, the webinar is recorded and will be sent to participants to view shortly after the webinar concludes. All right, now let's begin. Katrina, take it away.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Understanding Emotional Intelligence session. I'm really excited about this topic. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, is a valuable skill set for any workplace. And today, we're going to explore the concept of emotional intelligence and discuss how we can use it to achieve our success professionally and personally. So here are today's objectives. First, we'll dive into the general definition of EQ and discuss why it's important. From there, we'll take a deeper look into what emotional intelligence consists of and what challenges we can expect as we grow in this skill. Lastly, to conclude our journey into EQ, we will discuss a few practical application strategies to help us improve our aptitude for emotional intelligence in our workplaces, daily routines, and interactions with others. So EQ is a pretty fun, but it's a challenging topic. I'm really excited to share some insights, and I hope today's session will ignite your passion for EQ in your own lives. So let's begin our discussion with a working definition of emotional intelligence. All right, everyone. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is defined by Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves in their book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, as the ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and the ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. From this definition, we can see that emotional intelligence consists of two overarching actions with two audiences, ourselves and others. So the actions are being aware of the emotions and then managing them, while our audiences are ourselves and others. This also implies that emotional intelligence is not just about us. It naturally extends to our interactions with others. So now that we have our working definition, let's see how EQ can appear in real-life situations. So I'd like to share a quick story about Julie. Julie is an administrative assistant, and she's been with her company for about 2 years. A couple of weeks ago, while working on a project, Julie had an EQ incident as she and her coworker were doing their best to complete their project by their given deadline. The stress was high, and she noticed her coworker frequently speaking to her in a very short and curt manner. This bothered Julie, and she responded by saying, "You know, I'm doing the best I can, you know," in anger and frustration. She threw her materials down, stormed out of the room, and slammed the door behind her. Boom. The variables of stress, pressure, and deadlines in Julie's story are something that we all come across in our places of employment, and even our homes. But let's take a look at how EQ affected Julie's role in this scenario. So if we apply our working definition of Julie's scenario, would we say that she showed good awareness and understanding of her emotions and the emotions of her coworker? Will we say that she managed her awareness well? So really quickly, what I'd like for you to do is vote in the poll and let us know what you think.
Wow, that's a tricky one.
It is.
All right, looks like we're getting a couple votes in. We'll give it a few more seconds. All right, everybody, be sure to cast your votes now. The poll will close in 3, 2, 1.
All right, so the poll results are fantastic. It looks like the majority of us said no, and that is correct. So if you voted no, then you are correct. Julie's story is not an example of high emotional intelligence. It's actually an example of low emotional intelligence. But I'm sure it's one that we all have experienced or can personally relate to. I share this example so that we can see how our emotions impact our judgment and subsequently our behavior. And as we continue our session, we'll gain a better view of what high EQ looks like and how to achieve it. So now that we've had a glimpse into EQ, let's distinguish the difference between EQ and IQ, as these measurements assess aspects of who we are. So IQ is an intelligence measurement which focuses on assessing your ability to learn. This score is constant and typically does not change over time. We've already gone over the definition of EQ, but on the other hand, this is more of a skill that can be learned and developed. So now that we see the difference, and before we move on to why EQ matters, let's discuss the validity of emotional intelligence for a moment. So EQ is not just a myth or fluff. In fact, it's actually backed by science. So here's how it works. Everything that we experience through our senses travels to our brains through electronic or electric signals. These signals enter at the base of our brains near our spinal cord. They then move through our limbic system. And let's pause here for a moment. So our limbic system is a system that controls our basic emotions and drives, our motivators. Now let's resume. So after it hits this system, from the limbic system, these signals travel from there to our frontal lobe, which produces our rational thought process. So what this means is that we feel our emotions first, then we rationalize them second. This is the reason why our natural response is emotional versus rational or logical. So now that we see that, why is this concept so important? Why does it even matter? Why are we talking about it? Research shows that emotional intelligence is responsible for 58% of your performance. This means the majority of your performance at work is based on your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and the ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. Another statistic indicates that people with a high degree of emotional intelligence make more money, an average of $29,000 more per year than people with a low degree of emotional intelligence. So higher emotional intelligence can equate to higher salaries. That's awesome.
So awesome. And it's something we can work on and improve.
Yes, so we can grow. So if you're not there yet, you can get there. Also, Research shows that emotional intelligence is one of the key sought-after traits in leaders and promotions. So if you're looking to grow, this is an area that you want to focus on. In addition, studies have shown that people with a high emotional intelligence can better understand and manage their psychological well-being, and because of this, they are less susceptible to anxiety and depression. So overall, from a personal and professional perspective, emotional intelligence is an incredibly valuable skill set, as it can help you achieve not only your career goals, but your personal growth. So we've reviewed the importance and defined the concept of emotional intelligence. So our next step in our journey is to explore the components of EQ. What does it consist of? Generally, EQ is broken down into two major categories: personal competence and then social competence. These two are further delineated into self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Let's talk about each of these, and I'll highlight aspects of Julie's story to demonstrate each one. Self-awareness. This is the ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. It's essentially knowing your trigger points or your hot buttons. For Julie, her coworker's tone and approach, as well as the stress of the situation, may have been a trigger for an emotional response. Her self-awareness is knowing and understanding how she'd potentially react to the situation. Self-management is the ability to use your awareness of your emotions to stay flexible and direct your behavior positively. For example, in Julie's scenario, her self-management would have allowed her to acknowledge that her coworker's tone and communication approach were triggers for her. However, in exercising self-management, she could potentially ask if there was a problem or if her coworker was upset, rather than the outburst and storming out.
Yeah, that would have been a lot. Would have worked out a lot better for her.
Yes,
probably. If she
much
done that.
prettier situation if she would have done that. So now let's move to social awareness. And it's here, it's at this step that we actually step outside of our own perspectives. So social awareness is the ability to accurately pick up on the emotions in other people and understand what's really going on with them. Now, in Julie's situation, she could have noticed that her coworker was stressed, or maybe she hadn't eaten. We all know how we get. We get hangry. These could have been variables that influence her coworker's tone and approach. So social awareness, it requires the ability to listen and observe others to accurately perceive their situation. Now, lastly, we have relationship management. This is the ability to use your awareness of your own emotions and those of others to manage interactions successfully. Research shows that this is the most challenging aspect of emotional intelligence, especially in times of stress, much like Julie's scenario. So in her scenario, relationship management can look like her responding and saying something like this: "Hey, we're both stressed. Let's take a short break for a snack and maybe get some fresh air." This approach acknowledges the stress of the situation, and it acknowledges that it's getting to both of them. But it creates an opportunity to address the stress without straining the relationship. So since we've discovered the major components of emotional intelligence, let's assume there are going to be some challenges along the way. Here are a few common challenges with exercising emotional intelligence. The first is listening. As mentioned earlier, listening effectively and actively is a critical piece of the EQ puzzle. And without these skills, it would be difficult to be successful and to successfully achieve high EQ in our interactions. I think we can all admit that listening is not a skill we naturally excel at.
Not me.
It takes intention and practice. Now, additionally, another challenge is empathy and our ability to understand another's perspective. So, during emotionally charged interactions, where there's heightened tension, whether positively or negatively, our own emotions, tend to supersede those of others, making it very difficult for us to see their true perspective and empathize with them. The last challenge we'll review in this session is communication. How we communicate and how others communicate with us is either the solution or the source of our problem. Many times, it's a breakdown in communication that brings us to the point of emotional hijacking, where our emotions they have free reign over our behavior. As we tackle emotional intelligence, we must also prepare to do our part in how we communicate our feelings and ideas with others. Likewise, we also want to show respect in acknowledging their thoughts and ideas. And this is regardless of if we agree with them or not. By now, we should have a solid understanding of what it means to be emotionally intelligent. But let's look at another example. In this example, we have Denise and her boss, Alan, and they're in their one-on-one. Alan tells Denise this: "You're so disorganized. You never meet your deadlines. And I've also heard that you didn't do your share of work on the project." After hearing this, Denise feels her body tighten and her legs begin to shake. She knows that these comments offend her, and she has an urge to retaliate and argue. Instead, she takes a couple of deep breaths. She then replies, "Alan, I can tell you're pretty upset, and I'm sorry if I've let the team down. However, I find this feedback rather surprising, and I'd like to understand it a little more. May I ask you a few questions?" So this is different from our first example. Now, unlike Julie, Denise demonstrates a high level of emotional intelligence. She, one, recognizes how Alan's comments are affecting her. She feels her physical response and knows her natural reaction. But with this knowledge, she effectively navigates this potential hijacking by taking a deep breath prior to reacting. She uses social awareness to acknowledge that Alan is upset, but also remains respectfully curious about the feedback. Denise is an EQ star.
Yes, she is.
Yes.
Much better than Julie.
Absolutely. So, my hope is that with these examples, that they provide a real-life perspective of how high and low emotional intelligence shows up in our daily life. And a better understanding of how it looks will give us a better edge at increasing our emotional intelligence. Now, along with this, let's review a few strategies that can also help us increase our ability to be aware, understand, and manage our emotions and the emotions of others. So we are going to start where we began with self-awareness strategies. Remember, self-awareness is the ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. So one way to improve this skill is by knowing your triggers. Know your hot buttons. We touched on this earlier, and it's an incredibly important first step. The next strategy is to feel your emotions, or rather, feel how your body responds to being emotionally triggered. So here's an activity that you can do to help apply both of these self-awareness strategies by identifying how your triggers impact your behavior. First, write down your hot button issues, whatever they are. Then, try to recall what you feel physically that lets you know those buttons are being pushed. Lastly, write how you would typically respond when that situation occurs. For instance, if someone raises their voice at you, this may cause your pulse to quicken, your muscles might tense, or even your body temperature might rise. We call that your blood begins to boil. These are physical cues that are telling you your emotions are being triggered. And knowing this is your first line of defense in improving how you respond. Ultimately, this simple activity helps to increase your awareness of how your body responds to being triggered and how that response influences your potential behavior. The last self-awareness strategy that we'll cover in this session is asking yourself why you do the things you do, or why do you respond a certain way. This approach helps us to determine the root cause of our responses. And knowing this can help circumvent any unfavorable or unwanted responses. So we've covered self-awareness. Now let's move on to self-management. The first strategy in self-management is to breathe. Deep breaths. Though breathing is a natural response, what happens is many times our breaths are shallow. However, research shows that breathing deeply allows more oxygen to travel to the brain. The result of this for many people is a clearer mind and a more relaxed and calm state. This can benefit us in emotionally charged situations. So as we discussed, our emotions impact our limbic system first. But even one good deep breath may allow us enough time to gain control of our emotions. The next strategy in self-management is creating an emotion versus reason list. So much like the third self-awareness strategy, this process helps to identify the underlying root cause of our responses. In this strategy, you would make a column for emotion and a column for reason on a sheet of paper. In the emotion column, jot down what your emotions are telling you to do. And in the second column, or the reason column, write down what your reason or rational mindset is telling you to do. Having both of these perspectives at your fingertips will allow you to think through and choose the best option, rather than allowing your emotions to hijack the situation. The last self-management strategy is to incorporate time to process your emotions. Emotions are a natural aspect of the human experience, and they matter. They're important. So it's important for us to give them space in our lives. I encourage everyone to find a few moments in your day to process how you're feeling. Excuse me. For some, this could be a short walk around the building. For others, it may be a run at the gym. For some of us, it could be a moment of just pure solitude and silence in front of a hot cup of coffee. But overall, this approach assists us in avoiding unaddressed emotions that tend to sneak up and slip out. So that concludes our personal competency strategies. But now it's time to look outside ourselves and focus on recognizing the emotions and our relationships with others. So let's focus on social awareness. Remember, this is the ability to accurately pick up on the emotions of other people and understand what's going on with them. So how can we improve our social awareness? One way is to observe the body language of others. Much of what we communicate, it's nonverbal. And if our goal is to accurately assess how others are feeling, their body language can tell us a great deal. So, take a look at their eye movement, their facial expressions, their gestures, or even their posture. In addition, doing this regularly can also help us understand a person's natural behavior patterns. And that will make it much easier for us to notice when something is off. But in addition to body language, the next social awareness strategy is to simply greet people. Now, in their book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves, they state that greeting someone by name is one of the most basic yet influential social awareness strategies we can all adopt. It's easy. It breaks down barriers by acknowledging them for who they are. It can also help them perceive you as warm and caring, as well as fortify your connection with them. Just think about it. How do you feel when someone greets you by name? You feel like they know you. There's a sense of commonality. Lastly, empathy. Empathy is a huge component of social awareness. Empathizing with others allows true access into their perspective and side of the story. To practice, the next time you're in a meaningful conversation, take a moment to feel what the person you're talking to feels. In your mind, describe the feelings, summarize your thoughts, and then share to see if you've accurately assessed their emotions. For example, let's say the person you're talking to is enthusiastically telling you about their child's birthday celebration that they're planning. You can respond with, "That sounds very exciting. I can tell this is really important to you, and it seems like you're enjoying every moment of that experience, right?" Now, our last phase of emotional intelligence is relationship awareness. This is the ability to use your awareness of your own emotions and those of others to manage interactions successfully. Relationship awareness, it's the culmination of all the aspects of emotional intelligence. But let's discuss how we can improve our aptitude for this skill set. The first strategy is openness, and to be open when interacting with others. When it comes to relationship management, openness can operate in two ways. The first perspective is openly sharing your feelings, your story, your perspective. This allows others to see your authenticity and can help build trust. The other aspect of openness is being open to others. As they share their perspectives or ideas, find ways to be curious, regardless of whether or not you agree. I'm sure we've all experienced an immediate shutdown of our ideas or opinions, so we all know how that made us feel. We can relate to that. Openness creates the platform for an emotionally safe and meaningful dialogue. But much like openness, the second relationship strategy focuses on receiving others' perspectives through feedback. Feedback is very helpful to our growth, both personally and professionally. However, it's not always easy to receive. Many times, feedback, especially constructive feedback, creates a defensive mindset. When we're defensive, it's easy to allow our emotions to hijack those conversations. To avoid that, do the following the next time you receive constructive feedback. Number one, remember that for most, it's equally as difficult to give the hard feedback as it is to receive it. Secondly, listen with the intention to understand their perspective. See if you can connect the dots. And if you can't, step 3, ask meaningful clarifying questions or ask for examples. Lastly, take time to absorb the feedback. You don't want to respond automatically. Let it kind of sink in. Now, the last strategy that we have when it comes to relationship management is to take a moment to acknowledge the feelings of others. Much like empathy, this helps to see others' perspectives. Acknowledging others' feelings recognizes that everyone, all of us, we are entitled to our emotions, regardless of if we agree with them or not. Overall, let me tell you, there are many more strategies for any of these EQ elements, but my hope is that these will ignite everyone's EQ engine, get you going. So now let's review what we've covered today in a quick summary. We've covered what emotional intelligence is and why we need it. We learned the major components of EQ and discussed some challenges and roadblocks that can get in our way and keep us from reaching our full potential. We also discussed the ways to apply and improve our self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management.
Oh my gosh, that was so awesome, Katrina. I took in so much information. I just can't wait to start implementing some of these tips into my everyday life and just seeing how just being aware and taking a second to respond can just help me better manage my emotions and my relationships in my work life. So let's answer a few questions. So we can't hear you guys, as you remember, so send in your questions in the answer box if you have any. I see we're starting to get a few in here. All right, let's start with the first question. So what are some tips to help combat reacting too quickly in conversations?
All right, that's a great question, and I'm going to go back to one of the main steps, which is self-management. So in self-management, that's where we recognize what's happening. Some of the strategies were to take a deep breath. When in these situations, and we all encounter them, I try to breathe very deeply, give myself a few moments to collect my thoughts. I like to give a thoughtful response, especially in emotional situations, because they can get the better of us. So I'd say breathing, taking a pause, have some time before that natural reaction kicks in will help you from reacting too quickly. Another thing is listen. So many times we get caught up in our own emotional responses that we're not really listening. We're ready to defend. We're ready to retaliate. Listen so that you can at least understand their perspectives. And that also gives you time to calm down, to address your emotions, to get back to a level state. Sometimes people can talk us to their side, but we often don't give them the chance because we're reacting. So those are the two main things that I would recommend in those situations to prevent us from reacting too quickly.
Great. Okay, and here's a little follow-up to that one.
Sure.
What should I do if I need more time to respond?
This is a great question, and I like it because it's self-awareness. It lets you know, I know that right now I cannot respond appropriately, and that's fair. And it's okay to tell them that. Right now, I'd really like to give it some thought. I'm feeling a little bit upset, and I want to make sure that we have a good, meaningful dialogue. Can we take maybe like 5 minutes to just kind of cool down, take a breath, and then we can come back? Or maybe can we touch base on this a little bit later on today? I would like to give it some thought, things like that. And I think having that type of conversation already moves you up in the emotional intelligence kind of scale, because you're recognizing, you're addressing it, and you're doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily restrain or put strain on your relationship. It's a productive way of saying, hey, I'm feeling it right now. I'm feeling emotional, but I want us to have a good conversation. Let's take a break.
That's awesome. Okay, so how should you respond to your boss or coworker yelling at you in front of other employees?
This one is tricky. So I'm going to answer it in two different parts, because I think there's one way to respond with your boss, and I think you can take another path when responding to your coworker. But let's first acknowledge the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is this. Not everyone has a high level of EQ. And them yelling at you in front of coworkers or peers or anything like that, that is an example of low EQ. We all have these situations where our EQ does not perform well, all right? So let's just put that out there. It may not perform well. We're not perfect. We're going to have mistakes. So we're going to say that this was an EQ mistake.
Definitely an EQ mistake.
Definitely an EQ mistake on either of these parties' perspectives. But now let's talk about how do we handle it. So if it's your boss, first thing you want to recognize in being emotional intelligent is recognize, one, your environment. You're around your peers, another team that they lead, and this is also your boss. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you handle it. Number one, I would personally say the main thing that we want to stay away from is the feeling of insubordination. If we retaliate automatically, they yell, we yell. We can be seen as insubordinate. It could have some pretty heavy consequences, so we don't really want to lean in that way. One way is to, at this moment, because of the environment, take it. Take it, be quiet, absorb it. Then, at a later moment in the day, in the week, wherever, get to your boss in private and say, hey, boss, I felt this and this way. When you yelled at me, I felt disrespected. I want us to work together. Please help me as we get through it, and whatever that conversation looks like. But the main thing is you want to make sure that you keep your emotions in check during that situation to prevent any type of adverse consequences on you. Now, with your coworker, so we're going to go to your coworker now. With your coworker, it may be easier for you to get a private audience immediately and say, hey, what's going on? And maybe move them out of the environment where they're in front of people so that you all can have a productive private dialogue. Neither of these situations should be addressed right then and there. I think it would take a superstar in EQ to be able to handle both of these situations in a professional manner amongst peers. It's a very challenging task. So if you're able to do that, you have reached the highest level of EQ-ness. I don't even think it's in books, all right? But that's kind of where I would kind of recommend what you do. You definitely want to address this privately so that it doesn't affect the actual team itself.
That's great advice. All right, we've got another question here.
Yes.
What do you do if you walk into a meeting and it feels like it's an attack on you?
And that's fair, all right? I think that sometimes, especially in a feedback situation, it feels like a constructive feedback situation, depending on how whomever is delivering it. It can feel like an attack. Maybe it's your work and you put a lot of pride in your work, and it's natural. And I think the first thing you want to do is recognize that that's how you're feeling. I'm feeling attacked. Let them know, hey, you know, these comments are really bothering me, and they're putting me on edge, and I don't understand. And this is okay. It's okay to be vulnerable with your emotions. That means that you have control of them. Now, if you start reacting, that's different. But if you start that conversation, I'm feeling a bit attacked here, and I know that may not be your intention, but can you help me understand this a little bit better and talk through it? So the main thing there is your ability to, one, to be self-aware, and two, manage your emotions so that you can talk through that versus shutting down, slamming the door. Sometimes, and I do want to say this, that emotional intelligence doesn't necessarily, or I'll say low emotional intelligence doesn't necessarily equate anger. For some, it could be tears. For others, it could be an immediate shutdown where you don't talk and you don't say anything. So low emotional intelligence can look different ways, and whatever that looks like for you, try to push your way through it so that you can start to have those meaningful dialogues.
All right, awesome. So here's the last question here.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions on how to measure if my EQ is improving?
Actually, yes. One is there are plenty of assessments, EQ assessments online that are free. Find one now, take one later, and see how you score. That's one way of kind of measuring your EQ and if you're growing. Another way, actually I have two more. Another way is when we were talking about knowing your hot buttons and the activity and self-awareness, knowing your hot buttons, knowing your triggers, and then knowing how you respond. You can go back sometime later after you've been practicing your EQ and do that same activity with the same situation and see if your response is different. Now, don't just put a different response because you want to look like you're growing, but be honest with yourself. See if your response has changed, if it's grown, if it's shown a little bit more management. That's another way to measure. And the last thing that I would say is feedback. If you have a close friend, a close coworker, even your manager or your boss, if you have that type of rapport with them, ask them for feedback. Say, hey, I've been trying to work on my emotional intelligence, and what do you think? Have you seen any different behaviors? Do you think I'm growing? Give me an example. Or like when you're starting out with practicing, go to those people and say, hey, I'm going to start working on this. Be looking for this. Give me feedback so that you can see how you're improving or if you're improving. And they may be able to guide your growth in a way that you may not be able to see because they can see how you're behaving.
Okay, great. So I know that I said that was the last question, but we just got in a really good one. So I want to answer that one really quickly. So this will be our last one. So I am a 50-year-old plus, and situations have presented when a 35-year-old manager does not keep her EQ in check. This presentation has reinforced my EQ. Is it possible that age plays a role on the level of EQ?
Well, I'm not sure about the scientific data or the studies that have been done, but what I'll say is this. I think that with more life experience, we have more time to see how our emotions affect us. Then we have more time to learn how to manage them a little bit better. I think as we get older, we get wiser, so I think it's a natural correlation to see that with a little bit more experience in life, that we might be able to control our emotions a little bit better. We're less triggered and things like that. So I think that age does have something to do with it, but I don't think that that is an excuse. I don't think that just because I'm 30, that means that I have the allowance to be emotionally unintelligent. That's not exactly what I'm saying, but I do think there is a correlation with life experience and the ability to manage your emotions well.
What can I do to help make the situation better between me and my boss? She's been hurt by many other people who have worked with her in the past, and she's taking her anger out as if I'm out to ruin her or her reputation because of others. What can I do?
That's a really great question. I think there are a lot of components in it, but I'm going to try just to stick with the EQ pieces. So first, one thing that I would suggest is in these situations, think about how you're responding. Think about how you're interacting with her. Sometimes the way we're interacting with them puts them on defensive. So being self-aware helps us to understand what we might be doing. Now, if you are self-aware and you manage your emotions accordingly and properly, then I think the next step is to reach out. And this may require a little bit more of vulnerability on your part, and let her know, hey, boss, I know that you've been hurt in the past, and I want to let you know that I'm here to help. I want your success. I don't want anything bad to happen, but I really want us to have a productive relationship. You can even give examples and say, well, sometimes when you respond like this, it makes me feel certain ways. And hopefully what the goal of that is doing is creating an open dialogue between you and your boss. It disarms her so that she can get her emotions back. Because likely what's happening is she's being emotionally hijacked herself. And she may not know that, and I don't know if it's a she or he or whatever. But they may not know or be self-aware to know that that's what's happening. But by modeling your own emotional intelligence, you can start to have that meaningful dialogue. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. What's that quote? You be the change you wish to see.
Yes.
Yeah. So
do it.
Yeah. Be the EQ star that you wish to see.
Exactly. And modeling is incredibly important. We don't know how many people are influenced by just our natural behavior. So if we start modeling it, everyone will start to recognize.
Right. Love that. Okay. So what if the person has let the emotional trigger? I'm sorry. Let me start over. What if the person has let the emotional trigger out and realize it afterwards? How can the person recover from the lashing out?
Fair question. And so I'm going to say this to everybody that's listening. None of us are perfect. Even the highest EQ star is going to have an EQ fumble, all right? So that happens. I think for me, my opinion is that it takes an emotional intelligence, and it takes an emotional intelligent person to know when there's been unemotional intelligence. When they've shown low emotional intelligence. There we go, all right? So I think that just recognizing that and letting that person know and say, hey, look, I responded really, really bad. My emotions, they got the best of me, and I really want us to fix this. I'm sorry, and, depending on how the situation occurred, if something happened, it's always great to apologize, disarm them, and then proceed with, let's talk about it, let's get to a solution, things like that. But just even admitting the fact that you were emotionally unintelligent in that moment is a first step. So definitely acknowledging that, and then that will hopefully give you a good platform to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. Awareness is key there.
Yes.
Okay, next question. How should I respond to coworkers that seem to be intentionally using my personal triggers to upset me?
Oh, that's a good one. So, again, this is going to require a higher level of EQ. If you know that you're not ready there to handle that type of conversation, don't do it yet, all right? Because then that can create two emotionally unintelligent people, and that can create a very bad situation. But here's my advice. One, once you recognize that this is happening and you think it's intentional, first thing I recommend is always make sure you address these things in private. Get that person alone. This is not something that you want to talk to in the front of your coworkers, in front of everybody in the office. Get them alone and say, hey, it really bothers me when you do this, this, and this, and this. To me, it feels intentional. I know that may not be what it is, but I'm hoping that we can have a discussion, or can we talk about it? Am I doing something? Just start that dialogue, but tell them how you feel. Don't just necessarily say, well, you're doing this to trigger me, and you don't come with an assumptive stance. Go there just curious yourself. Remember, openness. Be open about your feelings, and then be open about their perspectives.
Great. Okay, how do you know if you have high emotional intelligence?
How do you know if you have high emotional intelligence? I hope that the webinar kind of gave you some examples of what that looks like. But high emotional intelligence could be that you don't allow your emotions to control your conversations. Even if you're in a heated situation or a tense situation, if you're able to talk through it without allowing your emotions to take hold, that's evidence of high emotional intelligence. And really quickly, I know in the webinar we use more anger, frustration, and things like that to kind of pinpoint low emotional intelligence. But I want you to know that low emotional intelligence, it can look different. It can look in a variety of ways. It may be anger, frustration, yelling, absolutely. But it could also be crying, tears, or it could be just a shutdown, and you say nothing and you just clam up. These are all versions of lower emotional intelligence or emotional hijacking, when our emotions have gotten the best of us in those situations. So if you've moved from experiencing those to now being able to talk through, you've reached a higher level of emotional intelligence.
Great. Okay, so what is more important, IQ or EQ?
Now, that's a great question. Okay, so I'll give you some historical context. Historically, IQ was looked at as the main measurement that jobs would look for, things like that. They wanted intelligent people, smart people, right? But I'm sure we all know some smart people that are just ineffective at work, ineffective with working with people. They may come off too strong. They may be socially awkward, but they're smart, right? So the trend has been that having the emotional intelligence, as you can see, it impacts not only yourself and how you manage your emotions, but also how you interact with others. That right there is a more valuable skill set in the workplace than just being smart. We can always be trained and gain knowledge in a particular career path or a particular role or skill set, but EQ, that's very hard to train. And so I would say that most organizations are looking for someone who already comes equipped with certain EQ skills. You don't necessarily have to be at the highest level, but just starting to actively work on it, that can definitely give you a better edge than just being smart.
Great. Okay, so this is our last question. So if you want any more questions, we have a couple more minutes left, so send them in right now, or this is going to be our last one, guys. So I know you mentioned one in the book, but do you recommend, or in the webinar, but do you recommend any books about EQ?
Yes. So I'm going to go back to the one that I mentioned. That's one of them, which is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradbury and Jean Greaves. This is one that I have personally read and listened to. So I have the audiobook version of it as well. And I like this book because it's a very quick and easy read. Two, it gives easy things that we can do on a daily basis to help improve our emotional intelligence. Many of the application strategies I pulled were from that book, and it has maybe like 17 of each in both self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So that's a great resource, and it's kind of like a beginner's setup. So if you're beginning this journey, I'd recommend that. Another one that I have done some research on that's actually on my to-read list is Daniel Goleman's Working with Emotional Intelligence. So this is another book for you. It's like the next level. Again, it gives more practical information, but I've heard it's highly recommended. So those are my top two that I would definitely suggest we all get started reading on.
Okay, awesome. So we got one more question. So this is actually going to be our last question.
Okay.
All right. So how to help others improve their emotional intelligence? How do we do that?
All right. So with others, number one, I think the first thing that we can do is model. Modeling what emotional intelligence looks like, modeling relationship awareness, modeling these behaviors gives them a platform to start growing. It does require us to be the bigger person in most situations. So we have to kind of swallow that, all right? Now, another way that we can do that is, depending on who this other is, if you have the relationship with them, to have that conversation. Say, hey, like, what's going on? I've seen you react this way, or that may not really be good in the work environment or wherever the environment is, and you can have that conversation and kind of see what their perspective is, and maybe suggest different ways of improving and things like that if that opportunity is available for you. What I would not suggest this is a not recommendation. I do not recommend it. Is just saying, hey, your emotional intelligence is really low. Okay, and you're horrible. All right, I would not. That's not the best approach. I wouldn't just go and go that direct. But I think there's definitely opportunities, depending on who that other is, to kind of engage them and have some conversation with them. But I think modeling is definitely a way that we can do it without necessarily interfering with their own personal emotions or reactions if we don't feel comfortable.
Awesome. Or since we're going to be sending this webinar out in a couple days when we're done with it, you can share this webinar with them. Say, hey, I just took this awesome webinar. I learned some great facts that I'm going to implement. Why don't you take a look? Watch it.
Absolutely. Share what you're learning.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you again, Katrina. You are amazing.
It's a pleasure.
If you still have any questions, please email social@ultimatemedical.edu. It's on the screen there, and I will connect you with Katrina to answer your questions. And as always, if you need career services assistance, we're here to help. Please call the number that's listed on the screen, and we just hope you enjoyed this webinar. We had so much fun here with you guys tonight, and please take a second to let us know what new facts you learned or your favorite tip that you learned in the webinar, and share on social media, and be sure to use the hashtag UMAwebinar. It's on the screen there. All right, guys, we hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.